Who's the greatest songwriter ever lived?
I don't know. You got to talk about Merle Haggard and Hank Williams, and then you start guessing. You got Kris Kristofferson and Billy Joe Shaver. And then you start.
For more than 60 years, Willie Nelson and Kris Kristofferson shared stages, songs, and a bond the world could never fully understand. One wrote anthems like Me and Bobby McGee. The other shaped the soul of country with Crazy. Yet rumors swirled about what really simmered beneath their friendship. Was it brotherly love, silent rivalry, or something no one dared to speak? Now, at 92, Willie Nelson is breaking decades of silence. He's revealing the truth behind the whispers, the private moments no fan has ever seen, and the story that's been hidden behind music, laughter, and the open road. Now, the world finally gets to hear what he's carried all these years.
And then you decided to throw it all in and become a country artist. Do you have any regrets or thoughts that, gee, what would have happened if I had have gone in another direction?
No, I like the way my life's turned out. When I knew these guys to begin with, I was a janitor at the recording studio. Now I get to get up there and sing harmony with them.
When you look at the stories of Willie Nelson and Kris Kristofferson, it's kind of funny how different their beginnings were, but at the same time, how much they ended up being alike once they both landed in Nashville. Willie came into the world back in the early 1930s, right in the thick of the Great Depression, in this little Texas town called Abbott. He was raised by his grandparents, who were out there picking cotton just to get by. Life wasn't easy by any stretch, but Willie had something that made it a little brighter. His very first guitar, a Sears Silvertone. That guitar opened the door to all kinds of sounds: gospel, polka, blues, you name it. From a pretty young age, music was his lifeline. He played in small-town bands, even hosted a little radio show as a teenager. But the thing with Willie was that his ambitions were just too big for a place like Abbott. You could tell early on he wasn't going to stay put. Now, a few years later, down in Brownsville, Texas, Kris Kristofferson was born into a totally different setup. His dad was an Air Force general, which pretty much meant Kris was expected to live a buttoned-up, disciplined life. The plan for him was a military career, maybe even politics, something clean-cut and respectable. And honestly, Kris could have done it. He was smart, athletic, the whole package. He was a Golden Gloves boxer, then went all the way to Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar, where he got deep into poetry, especially William Blake. But even with all that, he wasn't exactly the type to follow the rule book. There was something in him that leaned toward rebellion, and that pull toward music just kept growing stronger, even when he tried to keep it buried under all those expectations.
Notion of a highwayman, you have to understand where I'm coming from. This is the guy that came out of the Army and was a janitor and a ditch digger for 5 years. And the guys that were my heroes, the heroes of every serious songwriter or musician in Nashville. And it was like Greenwich Village or something.
The interesting part is that, despite these two guys coming from such different backgrounds, they both started scribbling down lyrics on the edges of their lives. Neither one of them could ignore that itch to write songs. But of course, back then, a lot of people didn't look at music, especially their style of music, as respectable. There were plenty of folks who thought what they were doing was too wild, too rebellious, or even flat-out sinful. And when you've got people trying to put you in a box like that, well, the road starts looking like your best bet to freedom. That's exactly what happened. By the 1960s, both Willie and Kris ended up in Nashville, chasing something bigger. Willie actually got there first, and things weren't pretty. He was broke, sleeping in his old Buick, and writing songs in the car. That's actually where he came up with Crazy, which would go on to be a huge hit for Patsy Cline. But at the time, he was basically selling these incredible songs for $50 a pop just to survive. The Nashville crowd didn't really know what to do with him. His phrasing was all over the place, jazzy, kind of unpredictable, and the chords he used were more complex than what folks were used to in country music. Kris showed up a little later, fresh out of the Army, and even with his Oxford education and all his accomplishments, he had to start out sweeping floors at Columbia Studios just to get his foot in the door. Imagine that, a Rhodes Scholar with a broom in his hand. But it put him close to the music he loved, and he kept this demo of Sunday Morning Comin' Down tucked away, hoping someone would listen. But Nashville didn't really welcome him with open arms either. They thought his songs were too wordy, too unconventional. The turning point came when Mickey Newberry, who was one of the few people in town who really saw the spark in both of them, invited them to a late-night hang at Tootsie's Orchid Lounge. That place was like a safe haven for outsiders, where struggling artists could share songs without judgment. That's when Willie first heard Kris sing "Help Me Make It Through the Night." It wasn't fancy, it was raw, direct, and honest in a way that cut through all the noise. Willie later said it was like somebody pulled back the curtain and let everyone see what real honesty in a song sounded like. That moment sealed the deal between the two of them. From then on, they had each other's backs, promising they'd record each other's songs no matter what the Nashville establishment thought. By the early 70s, country music in Nashville had gone all shiny and polished with that countrypolitan sound. Everything was smooth and commercial, but there was this growing hunger for something more authentic, something that spoke to the grit and the heart of real life. And as you'll see, that bond between them would help set the stage for something much bigger, because Nashville itself was about to shift.
Upon my pillow, hold your warm and tender body close to mine.
By the early 1970s, Nashville had settled into a formula that worked for record sales but left a lot of people restless. The countrypolitan sound, soft strings, carefully arranged vocals, and pop-influenced production was everywhere. For fans who wanted grit and honesty, it felt like the heart of country music had been traded for polish and perfection. You could walk into a record store, grab almost any album off the shelf, and it would sound slick, radio-friendly, and predictable. The problem was, real life wasn't predictable, and plenty of artists wanted to reflect that. That's when Willie Nelson and Kris Kristofferson, who had both been on the fringes of Nashville for years, stopped trying to squeeze themselves into that box. Willie had grown his hair long, braided it, and leaned into a laid-back image that matched his music. Kris, meanwhile, ditched the clean-cut look people expected from a Rhodes Scholar and Army pilot, trading it for a weathered leather jacket and the persona of a road-worn storyteller. They found kindred spirits in Johnny Cash and Waylon Jennings, and together, the four of them became the public face of a new wave of country artists who didn't want to play by the old rules. This shift became known as the Outlaw Movement. It wasn't a formal group or a record label gimmick at first. It was more a collective pushback. These artists demanded the right to produce their music the way they wanted, without layers of strings or executives editing their lyrics. They wanted songs that sounded lived in, the kind that hit you with the truth, whether it was pretty or not. 1973 turned out to be a landmark year. Willie released Phases and Stages, a bold concept album that told the story of a broken marriage from both sides. It was raw, unapologetic, and unlike anything the Nashville system was putting out at the time. Kris countered with Jesus Was a Capricorn, a record that blended sharp social observations with personal confession. The album produced Why Me?, one of the most unexpected hits of his career, and it showed that deeply personal songs could actually connect with a wide audience. Now here's where things got interesting. While the press loved talking about the Outlaws as a united front, they also couldn't resist trying to stir up competition. Reporters hinted at rivalries between Willie and Kris, asking who was the better songwriter or who had more influence on the movement. But anyone who actually knew them realized that wasn't the real story. The two men were allies, pushing for the same thing. The rivalry angle made good headlines, but the truth was far messier and much more human. Because even as their music careers were aligning, Kris's personal life was starting to fall apart. His marriage to Rita Coolidge was fiery and creative, but also turbulent. They recorded songs together, toured together, and at times seemed inseparable. But behind the scenes, there were fights, long stretches apart, and too much alcohol fueling bad decisions. The tabloids loved catching Kris in moments of self-destruction, whether it was late-night drinking or breaking things in frustration. Those snapshots made him look like a man unraveling, and in some ways, he was. Willie, who had his own scars from failed relationships and struggles, often stepped in quietly. He'd call Kris and invite him out to his Texas ranch, a place where the noise of gossip couldn't reach them. Out there, with horses in the fields and guitars on the porch, Kris could find a little breathing room. But even that friendship wasn't safe from rumors. Rita often spent time with Willie too, working on harmonies, or just hanging out on his bus after shows. And in the close-knit, gossip-heavy world of country music, that was enough to spark whispers. Some said Kris grew jealous, and although those stories were exaggerated, they painted a picture of tension bubbling under the surface. By the late 1970s, one particular night stands out. Kris, fueled by both alcohol and frustration, lashed out about the situation. Friends who were around said the argument got heated quickly. Willie, known for his calm and almost zen-like ability to diffuse drama, tried to talk sense into him, pointing out that trust has to run deeper than insecurity or fear. After that, though, the two didn't talk for several weeks, and the press quickly labeled it a feud. But here's the part that really keeps people curious. Instead of letting that silence grow into something permanent, Willie found a way to turn it into music. And not just another song or another album. What he did next was so unexpected, it almost looked like a personal message wrapped in vinyl. Some fans call it one of the most unusual tributes in country music history, and it raised a question that lingers even today. Was this record just about admiration, or was there something else Willie was trying to say to Kris? By the time 1979 rolled around, Willie Nelson was no longer the struggling songwriter living out of a beat-up Buick in Nashville. He had become one of the biggest names in country music. He had hits on the radio, a fan base that stretched far beyond Texas, and a reputation for being both unpredictable and fiercely authentic. With that success came the freedom to do things exactly the way he wanted. And one of the projects closest to his heart at that moment wasn't about himself at all. It was about shining a spotlight on his friend, Kris Kristofferson. So, Willie booked Arlen Studios down in Austin, Texas. Austin was quickly becoming a hub for musicians who didn't feel at home in the more rigid Nashville system, and Arlen had this laid-back vibe that was perfect for Willie's style. The idea was simple but risky. He wanted to record an entire album of Kris's songs and release it under the straightforward title, Willie Nelson Sings Kristofferson. It wasn't something the record label was thrilled about. The executives at Columbia looked at the plan and saw potential problems. From their perspective, Willie's fans wanted Willie's own material, not a collection of another man's songs. They worried it would confuse listeners or, even worse, hurt sales. But Willie wasn't making decisions based on charts. He felt a deep connection to Kris's writing, songs filled with honesty, grit, and poetry that matched the same spirit driving his own career. For him, recording the album wasn't just a business move. It was a personal tribute, almost like a conversation between two friends that just happened to be captured on vinyl. The sessions themselves were stripped down and intimate. Over the course of just 4 days, they recorded a dozen tracks, and Willie made sure the process stayed as natural as possible. There were no click tracks to force a rhythm, no heavy overdubs to polish the sound. It was Willie's voice, his guitar trigger, and the warm, soulful playing of his sister Bobby on piano. The simplicity of the arrangements allowed the strength of Kris's words to shine, but at the same time it carried all the unmistakable touches of Willie's style. In the end, Columbia's fears didn't come true. The album found its audience almost immediately, climbing to number 5 on the Billboard country charts and eventually going gold. More importantly, though, the project resonated with fans because it felt real. It wasn't slick or forced. It was one artist putting his heart into celebrating another. For many listeners, Willie Nelson Sings Kristofferson felt less like a commercial record and more like a love letter between two musicians who had walked through the same struggles and come out the other side still believing in the power of a good song. For Kris, hearing those recordings was overwhelming. At the time, he was parked outside a motel in Santa Fe when he first listened to the masters. Sitting there, far from the noise of Nashville or the spotlight of Los Angeles, he heard his own words being filtered through Willie's voice. It gave them new life and new meaning, almost like the songs had finally found the home they were meant for. For a man who had often felt restless, who moved between the army, academia, acting, and songwriting, that sense of belonging hit deeply. Willie wasn't just covering his songs, he was validating them, saying to the world, "These words matter." And while the record industry saw sales figures and fans heard a new favorite album for Willie and Kris, it was something more personal. It was proof that sometimes the deepest bonds between friends don't have to be spoken out loud. They can be played, sung, and shared with the world in a way that says far more than any conversation ever could. But here's where things get even more interesting. Just a few years later, both men would be pulled into a new project, one that took their friendship, added a couple more heavy hitters, and turned it into one of the most legendary supergroups in country music history.
Rolled out anyway. He lives in Texas.
I haven't worked in years.
Oh, great. Well,
Kris lives in California. John lives in Hendersonville. And I live in
We're
Brentwood.
pretty much settled down, really.
Back in 1985, Johnny Cash made a call that would change everything. He wanted to form a supergroup. That's how the Highwaymen came together. Willie, Kris, Johnny, and Waylon, 4 legends sharing the stage and somehow making it feel like every stadium was a revival tent. On stage, the chemistry was effortless, but off stage, the old tension still lingered. Kris had started drinking less, focusing on his writing and creative flow, while Willie was still the road warrior, chain-smoking and crisscrossing the country like it was his second home. Some moments tested them, like one night in Syracuse when Kris quietly confronted Willie about nodding off mid-song. Willie fired back, reminding him he'd carried the band through some of their most iconic riffs, and the air practically hummed with unspoken frustration. Then Johnny, ever the mediator, just grinned and asked if they were measuring or ready to play. The next song started, Willie front and center, voice strong, almost like a silent apology carried through the music. The 90s brought their own changes. Kris shifted into acting, eventually winning a Golden Globe, and spent more time in the calm of Hawaii. Willie kept touring, even recording the IRS tapes to settle old debts, and their paths crossed mostly at funerals for friends and fellow musicians. They didn't need constant contact. Gestures spoke louder than words. A package from Kris once arrived for Willie with a handwritten poetry collection, tucked with a note about keeping it close on long days. However, nothing prepared him for the devastating news that would come.
Tributes are pouring in for legendary singer-songwriter Kris Kristofferson, who died yesterday.
In January of 2024, Kris Kristofferson passed quietly at home in Maui, and the news reached Willie while he was in Waco, getting ready for a show. The text came from Kris's daughter, short and simple: he was gone. Willie canceled the gig, something he almost never did, and for a moment, the usual rhythm of the road felt completely frozen. He didn't announce anything to the press, didn't call the fans. He just walked to the bus lounge and pulled out the letter he had kept tucked in his guitar case for more than 2 decades. The handwritten poetry Kris had sent him so long ago. It was like holding a piece of their shared history in his hands, and all he felt was quiet, the kind of stillness that makes it feel like the highway lights have all gone out. 2 weeks later, Willie recorded a solo version of Why Me, Kris's gospel song that had always carried so much weight. He sang it in the same key Kris had written it in, and by the last chorus, his voice cracked, not as a performance, but almost like a private prayer. He didn't release it to the world. Instead, he quietly mailed the thumb drive to Kris's family with no return address, a final, personal gesture of gratitude and brotherhood that spoke louder than any public tribute could. And then there's the truth Willie had never shared while Kris was alive. Back in 1988, during a highwayman stop in New Jersey, Kris was at a low point, drinking too much, spiraling, and admitting to Willie that he had been thinking about ending it all, feeling trapped in a darkness he couldn't shake. Without hesitation, Willie physically carried him to the tour bus and stayed with him all night, talking him through it. Kris made him promise to keep it a secret, worried about his reputation, and Willie kept that promise for 36 years. Their friendship was never just about music or touring. It was about survival, the quiet acts of saving each other in ways no one outside that circle could ever see. A shared laugh, a look, a song. These were the moments that kept them alive, and in the end, that bond outlasted everything else. If this story hit you like a late-night freight train, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Drop a comment below and tell us which Highwaymen song still echoes in your heart. And please, share this video with that friend who thinks outlaw music is a thing of the past. Let's keep their wheels rolling, their stories alive, and their music playing forever.